The street was quiet, almost too quiet, until the sound of my daughter's scream shattered the evening air. I ran toward her and froze. My little girl, my baby, was lying there bleeding, her wheelchair toppled beside her. And standing there with a smug, icy smile was Karen, the HOA tyrant who had tormented our family for months. She didn't even flinch as she walked away, leaving my daughter in pain on the cold asphalt. My heart was pounding, my hands trembling. I wanted to scream, to fight, but I was powerless. The neighbors were frozen, too, unsure whether to intervene or just watch. I thought of my husband away deployed, serving our country, but little did Karen know. He wasn't just any man, he was a Navy SEAL, and he was about to come home. And when he does, nothing will ever be the same. Before I dive into this shocking story, I need to ask you something. Where are you watching this from? Comment your city below, because I want to see how far this story reaches. Seriously, I'm curious to know if it's just happening in small neighborhoods like ours or all across the country. Now, before we get any further, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss stories like this, real-life drama, suspense, and jaw-dropping twists that will leave you on the edge of your seat. All right, let me set the scene. It was a quiet evening, the kind where everything feels normal, almost safe. But that illusion shattered in an instant. My daughter, who has always needed extra care, had been targeted by someone who thought she could get away with cruelty. HOA Karen, an entitled, ruthless woman, did the unthinkable. She left my child bleeding on the street, ignoring her pain, ignoring any trace of humanity. The moment I saw her lying there, helpless, my heart broke in ways I can't even describe. At that moment, a storm of fear, anger, and desperation took over me. I knew I couldn't let this slide, but I was powerless alone until I remembered who was coming home. The one person who could turn the tables in ways Karen could never imagine. And when he arrived, nothing would ever be the same. So stay with me, because this story isn't just about cruelty, it's about courage, justice, and the lengths a parent will go to protect their child. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that tricks you into thinking everything is safe. The sun had just started to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in soft oranges and purples, giving the neighborhood an almost serene look. But serenity is a dangerous illusion, one I would learn the hard way. My daughter, Emma, had been playing outside for only a few minutes. She was always careful, cautious, because of her wheelchair, because of her condition, because I had spent years teaching her how to navigate the world without fear, even though the world often didn't reciprocate. Then it happened. I heard her scream before I even saw her. It wasn't the playful scream of a child. It was raw, sharp, filled with pain and confusion. My heart skipped a beat, my stomach dropped, and I sprinted toward the sound. And there she was, my little girl, my baby, lying on the asphalt, her wheelchair tipped over beside her, one of her legs bleeding, the other trapped awkwardly beneath the chair. And standing a few feet away, with that smug, self-satisfied look I had come to despise, was Karen. HOA Karen, the woman everyone in our neighborhood whispered about behind closed doors, the woman who always found a way to make everyone else's life miserable, especially ours. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she turned, almost elegantly, as if she had just finished some mundane task, leaving destruction in her wake. She didn't even flinch at Emma's cries, at the blood, at the fear in her eyes. "Mom!" Emma cried, tears mixing with the blood running down her leg. I dropped to my knees beside her, my hands shaking uncontrollably as I tried to lift her, to comfort her, to stop the bleeding, even though I knew I couldn't do much. The metallic tang of blood filled my nose, and for a moment the world narrowed down to just the sound of her cries and the sight of that cold asphalt. Why? Why would she do this? I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. Neighbors had started to peek out of their windows. Some were frozen, unsure whether to intervene, their faces masks of curiosity and fear. Others whispered, pointing fingers, judging, condemning, but no one moved fast enough to actually help. And Karen? She was already walking away, heels clacking, her back perfectly straight, like a predator who had just marked her territory and was leaving. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to charge, to attack, to make her pay for even breathing while my daughter was in pain. But I was paralyzed, not physically, but by rage and fear, by the helplessness that comes when your child is vulnerable and the world seems to side with cruelty. Emma whimpered, clutching her leg, tears streaking down her dirt-smeared face. "Mom, it hurts so much," she said, her voice small, fragile. My heart broke again. Every mother knows that moment, the one where your child is suffering and you feel utterly powerless. That was it. That moment. I pulled her into my lap, wrapping my arms around her, trying to stem the bleeding, trying to breathe, trying to tell myself I could protect her. And yet, there was a quiet rage building inside me, one that I had never felt before. I couldn't let this go. I wouldn't let this go. As I dialed 911, explaining the situation, my eyes kept flicking to Karen, who was now disappearing around the corner, as if nothing had happened. The operator was calm, professional, but I could barely hear her over my own shaking hands and the sound of Emma's sobs. I gave the address, repeated it, demanded help. But the seconds felt like hours, and the sight of my daughter bleeding on the street, trembling, filled me with a desperation I can't put into words. And then it hit me. Karen didn't know who she had really provoked. She didn't know that the man who had trained her to never back down, who had taught her strength, courage, and resilience, was coming home. She didn't know that her arrogance, her cruelty, would awaken something far more dangerous than she could imagine. I remembered the late-night calls from my husband deployed overseas, telling me about the discipline, the skills, the mindset that kept him alive in situations far worse than this. He was a Navy SEAL, and for months, I had feared what would happen if something happened to Emma while he was away. And now he was about to return, just in time. But for now, I had to focus on Emma. I pressed a clean cloth against her wound, whispering reassurances I didn't entirely believe, trying to keep her calm, trying to ignore the searing anger that burned in my chest. Neighbors had started to gather, murmuring, pointing, some shaking their heads in horror, some quietly filming the scene. The ambulance arrived within what felt like an eternity, paramedics rushing to her side, checking her vitals, stabilizing her leg, wrapping it tightly. I followed them into the ambulance, refusing to let go of her hand, my mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts, the most prominent being the promise I silently made to her: Karen would pay. And I knew it wouldn't just be in the courts or in words. Something was coming, something inevitable, and it would change everything. Because Karen had underestimated us. She had underestimated the lengths a parent would go to protect their child. And most importantly, she had no idea that the man who had trained, fought, and survived in the most extreme conditions imaginable was about to return home, and she would be the first to face the consequences of her cruelty. The ambulance doors slammed shut behind us, leaving the street eerily silent. Karen had vanished, slipping away like a shadow, leaving nothing but chaos and a trail of fear behind her. My daughter lay in the stretcher, her small body trembling, her face pale, and her eyes wide with terror. I gripped her hand so tightly it ached, as if holding on could somehow make the world right again. As the paramedics worked, I felt an emptiness inside me, an aching, gnawing sense of helplessness that I couldn't shake. I had always been strong for Emma, always fought to protect her, but in that moment, all I could do was watch. I couldn't rewind time. I couldn't undo Karen's cruelty. I couldn't erase the blood on my daughter's leg or the fear in her eyes. I was powerless, and that powerlessness burned worse than any injury. The ambulance ride was a blur. The flashing lights outside the window streaked across my vision, mixing with my tears. I whispered to Emma, trying to calm her, trying to be the pillar she needed me to be. But inside, I was fraying, unraveling thread by thread. I couldn't stop thinking about Karen, her smug, unrepentant smile, her heels clicking away as if she had done nothing wrong. She had no conscience, no empathy. She thrived on power, on control, on cruelty. And she had chosen my daughter as her target. Once we reached the hospital, everything accelerated. Nurses whisked Emma away to the emergency room, and I was left pacing the waiting area, my hands gripping the edges of the chairs, my mind racing. I tried to focus on the facts. The wound was serious, but not life-threatening. She would recover. But the emotional scars, the fear, the trauma, those would linger. And Karen might think she had won. She might think she could intimidate, bully, and walk away unscathed. She was wrong. I thought about the neighbors, too. Some had seen everything. Some had done nothing. Some whispered, judging me, whispering about my parenting, about my inability to control the situation. I wanted to scream at them, to tell them that judgment means nothing when your child is in pain. But anger alone wouldn't help Emma heal. Only action, careful, precise action, could ensure she was safe again. And then there was the memory of my husband. He had been overseas for months, serving in dangerous conditions, performing missions that could make ordinary people shiver in fear. He was a Navy SEAL, trained to handle situations far worse than anything this neighborhood could throw at him. I had always known he was extraordinary, but I had never fully grasped how his presence would change the dynamic until now. I wished he were here, not just for the security he could provide, but for the reassurance, the calm, the certainty that we were not alone in facing this. I sat down, trying to collect my thoughts, when a nurse came out to update me. Her wound is clean. She'll need stitches, but she's stable, she said. I exhaled slowly, relief washing over me, but it was tempered by the knowledge that the battle wasn't over. Karen's cruelty had not been just physical. She had left a mark on Emma's spirit, a lingering fear that wouldn't heal with medicine alone. The hours stretched endlessly. I stayed by Emma's side, holding her hand, whispering stories, trying to distract her from the pain. Every time the hospital door opened, my heart jumped, imagining Karen had returned, imagining her smug face, imagining her trying to cause more harm. Sleep was impossible. My mind refused to quiet, replaying the incident over and over, dissecting every second, every glance, every decision. I couldn't help but think of the power imbalance in our neighborhood, the way Karen manipulated rules, the way she twisted authority to her advantage. HOA boards were supposed to protect communities, but in her hands, they became weapons. And I had seen it before, her subtle intimidation, her quiet cruelty, but this was the first time it had escalated to violence. It was a line crossed, one that could not be ignored. As night fell, the hospital grew quieter. Emma finally drifted into a restless sleep, and I sat back in my chair, exhaustion threatening to overtake me. That's when I allowed myself to think about him, my husband, my partner, the man who had trained me to believe in strength and resilience. He was coming home soon, and with him would come the force and protection that Karen could never anticipate. The thought gave me a flicker of hope amidst the chaos, a tiny spark that maybe, just maybe, justice wasn't out of reach. But hope alone wasn't enough. I knew that once he returned, things would change, but they would change according to his rules. And Karen had no idea that the woman she had hurt, the family she had attacked, was far from helpless. I began to plan in my mind, thinking through contingencies, imagining what it would look like when the balance of power shifted. As I sat there, staring at the sleeping form of my daughter, I made a silent promise. She would never feel that helpless again. Karen's actions would not go unanswered. And when my husband came home, he would bring with him not just his training and his strength, but a calculated precision that would ensure Karen could never harm us again. For now, though, I had to endure the waiting, the uncertainty, the gnawing fear that lingered even as the immediate danger seemed to have passed. I would hold Emma close, shield her with every ounce of my being, and prepare for what was coming. Because I knew one thing with absolute certainty: Karen's reign of cruelty was about to meet its match, and the storm that was coming would leave no room for mercy. The helplessness I felt in those hours was profound, but it was also transformative. It sharpened my resolve. It made me understand, in the deepest part of my heart, the lengths a parent will go to protect their child. And it set the stage for the reckoning that was about to unfold, a reckoning that would shake the neighborhood, expose the truth, and remind everyone that cruelty has consequences. The sound of the front door opening echoed through the house, but this time it wasn't the creak of my anxiety. It was the familiar, steady rhythm of someone who commanded presence. I froze mid-step in the hospital corridor, my hand tightening around Emma's small one, because I knew that sound. I had heard it countless times in my husband's stories over the phone during his deployment. That calm, controlled, unshakable step that belonged only to a man trained to survive, to lead, to protect. My breath caught, my heart rate surged, and in that moment, a wave of relief crashed over me like nothing I had felt in weeks. He was home. My husband, Emma's father, the man who had faced the worst of the world and lived, was finally home. And he didn't even know yet the storm he was walking into. When he appeared, dressed in casual clothes now, but with the unmistakable aura of a Navy SEAL, everything shifted. He smiled at Emma, kneeling down beside her hospital bed, and she instinctively reached out to him, clutching his hand as if she had known all along he would be the one to make things right. My husband's eyes met mine, a mix of concern, understanding, and that quiet determination that always made me trust him completely. "I got your messages," he said softly, brushing a lock of hair from Emma's forehead. "What happened?" I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "Karen, the HOA. She left Emma bleeding on the street." My words faltered, shaking with anger and fear. I didn't know what to do. I tried to stop it, but he didn't interrupt. He just listened, his face calm, absorbing every detail, his jaw tightening imperceptibly at the mention of Karen. When I finished, he didn't speak immediately. Instead, he leaned back, closing his eyes for a brief moment, processing, calculating. "She won't get away with this," he finally said, his voice low but unyielding. "I promise you she won't. Not to her, not to anyone else." There was something in the way he said it, an absolute certainty that made my chest tighten. This wasn't just a threat. This wasn't an idle warning. This was a promise forged from years of training, discipline, and experience, and I knew deep down that Karen had just unknowingly stepped into a storm she couldn't survive. For Emma, the fear in her eyes slowly began to dissipate. She clung to him, and I could see the tension leave her small body, replaced by a fragile sense of security. Even at her young age, she instinctively knew that her father's presence changed everything. The world outside the hospital walls, with all its threats and cruelty, suddenly seemed less dangerous. He spent the rest of the night with us, sitting quietly in the chair beside Emma's bed, going over every detail of the incident as I recounted it. The paramedics' report, the timeline, Karen's actions, and the neighbors' reactions. Nothing escaped his attention. Every piece of information was filed away, every nuance noted, every potential weakness considered. When he finally spoke, it was calm but chilling. "This isn't just about retaliation," he said, his eyes locked on mine. "It's about making sure she never does this again, to anyone. Emma's safety isn't negotiable. And Karen, she's about to learn that the world doesn't bend to bullies." I felt a mixture of relief and fear. Relief because he was here, because his presence alone felt like a shield around Emma, and fear because I knew once he decided action was necessary, there would be no turning back. His calm, collected demeanor hid a storm beneath the surface, a storm that Karen would soon feel directly. That night, as Emma slept fitfully, my husband and I stayed up planning. Not in a rash, impulsive way, but with precision, just like he always operated. We reviewed every detail, anticipated every possible move Karen could make, and prepared for the eventual confrontation. Each strategy he outlined was methodical, measured, and effective. I realized in that moment that he wasn't just coming home to comfort us, he was coming home to fight, to protect, and to ensure justice. The next morning, the hospital corridor felt different. People whispered as we passed, stealing glances, sensing the quiet intensity of a man who had seen the worst of the world and survived. His mere presence commanded respect and fear in equal measure. I could almost feel the invisible armor he carried, the kind forged through years of grueling training, missions that tested every limit of endurance and courage. Emma, now awake and cautiously smiling, clung to him. I could see the difference his arrival had made. For the first time since the incident, she laughed, a small, fragile laugh, but genuine. And I realized that while Karen had left us shaken, she had not broken us. Not while he was here. Later that day, we left the hospital. The ride home was tense, each street familiar, yet filled with the weight of anticipation. He drove, silently, hands steady on the wheel, eyes scanning the road like a predator assessing its territory. I could feel the focus radiating off him, a tangible force that made me both nervous and oddly reassured. At home, the house felt different too. No longer just a place of sanctuary, it had become a staging ground. Plans were made, contingencies discussed, and the family dynamic shifted subtly but significantly. Karen's cruelty was no longer an abstract threat. It was real, immediate, and now, with my husband home, directly challenged. That evening I watched him stand by the window, staring out into the neighborhood, his silhouette framed by the setting sun. He didn't speak, but I didn't need words. I knew he was analyzing, waiting, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. And I knew that when it came, Karen wouldn't know what hit her. Emma slept peacefully that night, cradled between us, and for the first time since the incident, I allowed myself to hope. Hope not just for her recovery, but for the justice that was coming. Karen had underestimated us, underestimated the lengths a father would go to protect his child, and that would be her greatest mistake. The neighborhood had a quiet, almost deceptive calm as we returned home. But inside, the air was thick with anticipation. My husband, the Navy SEAL who had walked back into our lives just hours ago, moved with a controlled precision that immediately set the tone. Every glance, every step, every motion was deliberate, almost imperceptibly calculated. I could see it in the way he scanned the surroundings, the way his eyes lingered on doorways and corners as if reading the space for potential threats. Karen didn't know yet that she had stepped into a trap she could never escape. She had walked away from our daughter bleeding in the street, arrogantly confident that her authority and status within the HOA shielded her from consequences. But she had underestimated the consequences of crossing someone who had trained for scenarios far deadlier than a neighborhood feud. It began with a simple, innocuous message. My husband sent Karen an official-looking email, polite but precise, notifying her that there would be a community meeting to discuss recent incidents and appropriate conduct. The wording was deliberately neutral, professional. He knew she would read it and feel both intrigued and threatened. And it worked. Within hours, Karen responded, her tone dripping with feigned innocence and subtle aggression. We knew she was coming over, and we were ready. When she arrived, she carried herself as always. Heels clicking against the pavement, a perfectly rehearsed smile on her face, hair flawless, eyes sharp. She believed she held the upper hand, that she had the power in this interaction. But the dynamic had shifted subtly but unmistakably the moment my husband stepped onto the porch to meet her. "Good afternoon, Karen," he said, his voice calm, steady, and almost unnervingly controlled. "I'm glad you could make it." Karen smiled, tilting her head as if she were appraising him. "I'm always happy to discuss neighborhood matters," she replied smoothly. But there was a flicker in her eyes, a micro-expression she couldn't hide, a momentary crack in her armor. She had sensed something different in him, something dangerous. We invited her inside, and as she stepped through the door, my husband subtly positioned himself between her and Emma, who was seated quietly on the couch. I watched as Karen's confident posture wavered, almost imperceptibly, as she realized this wasn't the same woman and child she had intimidated before. There was now a protector, a guardian, present, calm, and utterly unshakable. The conversation began superficially with pleasantries and neutral statements about the HOA, neighborhood rules, and minor complaints. But the tension beneath the surface was palpable. Karen spoke carefully, her sentences measured, each word chosen to test, to manipulate, to assert dominance. My husband responded with the same calm precision, answering every jab and veiled insult without emotion, without aggression, but with a subtle weight, that carried unmistakable authority. At one point, Karen smirked, assuming she had found a weak spot. "I just want to make sure everyone follows the rules," she said, her tone sweet but cutting, "especially those who need a little extra supervision." I felt a surge of anger, but my husband's hand on my shoulder reminded me to stay calm. He leaned slightly forward, voice even but carrying an unspoken warning. "Rules are important, Karen, but kindness, empathy, and respect are far more so. Hurting a child violates all three." Her smirk faltered. She opened her mouth, ready with another biting remark, but he didn't give her the opening. Instead, he let silence fill the room. And in that silence, the weight of his presence, his calm dominance, and the unspoken truth that he would not tolerate cruelty settled over Karen like a cold, heavy fog. She shifted, trying to regain control, moving the conversation toward procedural complaints and HOA bylaws. But my husband anticipated her every maneuver, countering subtly, exposing contradictions in her statements, and highlighting the impact of her actions without ever raising his voice. He had the skill of disarming, of turning her arrogance against her, making her realize, without shouting, that the power she thought she held was an illusion. For the first time, I saw fear, not the exaggerated, performative fear she used on others, but real, genuine fear. Her eyes flicked toward Emma, toward me, toward my husband, and in that instant, I knew she understood the gravity of what she had done. She had underestimated not just a mother's love, but a father's training, experience, and resolve. The conversation ended with a final, deliberate statement from my husband. "I suggest you reflect carefully on your actions. The safety of my family is non-negotiable. Any further attempts to intimidate or harm will have consequences beyond your imagination." Karen left shortly after, her face tight, composed but strained. She had tried to assert dominance, but for the first time, she felt powerless. And she knew it. After she left, I exhaled, relief flooding through me, but it was tempered by the knowledge that the battle wasn't over. Karen was cunning, manipulative, and dangerous in her own right. She might retreat for now, but the psychological game she played would continue. What mattered was that we had shifted the balance of power, and Karen had no idea what was coming next. I turned to my husband, gratitude and awe mingling in my gaze. You handled that perfectly," I whispered. He shook his head slightly, a calm, measured expression on his face. "This was just the beginning. She underestimated us. She underestimated what a parent will do to protect their child. That's her mistake." Emma, sitting quietly, looked up at him, her eyes wide. "Daddy, are you going to make her pay?" she asked softly. He crouched down to her level, smiling gently. "I'm going to make sure she can never hurt anyone again, sweetheart. You're safe now, and that's all that matters." In that moment, I realized the depth of the shift that had occurred. Karen had always been confident, untouchable, untethered by morality. But with my husband home, calm, calculated, and utterly prepared, she had met someone who could match her cunning, who could anticipate her moves, and who would protect his family without hesitation. The tension in the neighborhood had not dissipated, it had only shifted. Karen would return to her home, seething, plotting, wondering how she had been outmaneuvered without even realizing it. And we would be ready, watching, anticipating, prepared for every potential move she might make next. That night, as we sat together as a family, I realized something crucial. Courage isn't just about confronting danger in the moment. It's about preparation, strategy, and unshakable resolve. Karen had met her match, not through anger, not through aggression, but through calculated strength, the kind honed in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. And she had no idea what was coming next. The night was thick with tension. Even the streetlights seemed to hold their breath, as if anticipating the storm about to erupt. Karen had returned home, her mind racing with frustration, fear, and disbelief. She had always believed she held power, the kind that came from manipulation, status, and intimidation. But now, for the first time, she realized that her carefully constructed world could crumble in an instant. and she had no idea that the family she had tormented was about to reclaim control in a way she never imagined. The next morning, my husband's plan went into motion. It was precise, calculated, and executed with military precision. He had done something remarkable. He didn't just wait for Karen to make her next move. He anticipated it, laid traps, and prepared contingencies. From the outset, it wasn't about vengeance. It was about justice, about sending a message that cruelty, especially toward a child, could never go unchecked. Karen believed she could continue her reign of intimidation, subtly threatening neighbors, sending snide emails, and inserting herself into other families' business. She had no idea that each move she made was being tracked, analyzed, and countered with invisible precision. My husband had gathered evidence, videos, photos, witness statements, and every single piece painted her actions in stark, undeniable truth. She had underestimated him, and that was her first fatal mistake. The first shocking twist came when Karen received an official notice from the HOA, not the usual passive-aggressive letter she expected, but a detailed report exposing her behavior, supported by irrefutable evidence. She read it, her fingers trembling, her perfectly manicured nails biting at the edges of the paper. Her face went pale as she realized that the neighborhood, the community, and now the legal authorities were aware of her actions. The ground beneath her confidence was crumbling. But the real twist, the one that truly shocked her, was the next step. My husband arranged a discreet meeting with key HOA members and neighbors, ensuring that Karen would be present. She entered the room with her usual arrogance, expecting a performance, expecting to charm her way out of accountability. But she was met with something she had never experienced, a wall of calm, disciplined authority. My husband stood at the front, his presence commanding the room, his calm voice carrying weight that even Karen could not ignore. He revealed the full extent of her actions, not just the incident with Emma, but a pattern of intimidation, harassment, and abuse. Each revelation was like a hammer blow, dismantling her carefully curated persona. Witnesses spoke up, confirming every accusation. Karen's arrogance turned to panic as she realized that she was trapped, not by force, but by truth, evidence, and the unwavering resolve of a family she had underestimated. Then came the final, most shocking twist. My husband had anticipated her attempts to manipulate or evade accountability. Hidden cameras captured every interaction she had with neighbors after the incident. Social media posts, subtle threats, veiled comments, all cataloged, all documented. He presented the evidence with calm precision, leaving her no room to argue, no space to maneuver. Karen's reputation, carefully maintained for years, collapsed under the weight of her own actions. As the meeting ended, Karen stumbled out of the room, her usual confidence shattered. She had miscalculated every move, underestimated every person in that room, and most importantly had failed to foresee the presence of a father whose training, discipline, and love for his family made him unstoppable. She had thought she was untouchable, but the reality was undeniable. She had been defeated by strategy, preparation, and sheer moral force. At home, the sense of relief was palpable. Emma hugged her father tightly, her small arms wrapping around him with a sense of safety and trust that only a child could feel. For the first time since the incident, she smiled without fear, without reservation. My husband held her close, whispering reassurance, a promise of protection, a quiet victory over the cruelty that had once seemed insurmountable. But the twist didn't stop there. Karen, humiliated and desperate, attempted one final maneuver, a public display intended to shame our family, to rewrite the narrative. She organized a community gathering, expecting to regain control, to manipulate perception, to assert dominance. But my husband had anticipated this too. Every detail of her plan was countered with subtle, unassailable measures. Her efforts backfired spectacularly. Neighbors saw her for what she truly was, manipulative, cruel, and incapable of genuine empathy. Her own reputation was permanently tarnished, a lesson in humility and accountability she could not ignore. By the end of the week, Karen had retreated from the neighborhood entirely. The HOA took formal action, banning her from board involvement, and ensuring that her ability to intimidate others was permanently curtailed. It was a shocking turn of events, even for someone like me who had known the depth of my husband's capabilities. The man who had returned from deployment wasn't just a father. He was a protector, a strategist, and a force that Karen could not withstand. And through it all, the most powerful twist of all was the transformation within our own family. Emma's laughter returned, her trust in the world slowly rebuilt, and my husband and I realized that our unity, our love, and our resilience had not only saved our daughter, they had reshaped the neighborhood's balance of power. Karen had underestimated us in every way, and the cost of that miscalculation had been total. In the end, justice wasn't about vengeance. It was about empowerment, preparation, and unwavering resolve. And the final twist, the one that left everyone in shock, was the realization that sometimes the greatest force isn't violence or aggression, it's strategy, love, and the determination to protect what truly matters. Karen had learned this the hard way, and Emma learned that even in the darkest moments, there are guardians ready to fight for her safety, no matter the cost. The morning after Karen's public humiliation, the neighborhood felt different. The air seemed lighter, almost as if the tension that had been choking the streets had finally been lifted. People walked with their heads held higher, neighbors exchanged genuine smiles instead of wary glances, and the oppressive atmosphere Karen had cultivated for years had vanished. It was a quiet victory, but one that resonated deeply with everyone who had witnessed the aftermath. At home, the sense of relief was profound. Emma's laughter filled the rooms again, a sound that had been missing for far too long. She ran through the house, her wheelchair now a tool of independence rather than a symbol of vulnerability, her smile radiant. Watching her, my husband and I felt a deep unspoken gratitude, not just for the resolution of Karen's cruelty, but for the strength our family had discovered within ourselves during this ordeal. The days that followed were filled with reflection. My husband, though calm as ever, allowed himself rare moments of quiet emotion. He knew the stakes we had faced, the danger that had lurked in subtle forms, and the courage it had taken to face a threat that wasn't just physical, but psychological. He reminded me, and in turn I reminded myself, that the battle we had fought wasn't just against one cruel woman. It was a testament to the lengths a parent will go to protect their child, to the strategies we employ, and to the unwavering vigilance required to defend those we love. Neighbors approached us, expressing their shock, their admiration, and in some cases, regret. Many admitted they had been afraid to speak out, fearing Karen's wrath, but seeing the consequences of her actions made them realize that courage isn't about avoiding fear. It's about acting despite it. Some even apologized for standing by silently, a humbling reminder that change often requires accountability from everyone, not just the most directly affected. The HOA underwent a complete restructuring. New leadership prioritized fairness, empathy, and transparency. Karen was permanently removed from any position of influence. Her attempts to reclaim authority were met with formal resistance, ensuring that her reign of intimidation would never resume. And though she remained in the broader city, her presence was diminished, stripped of power, and unable to cause harm to our family or the community she had once dominated. Emotionally, the most significant impact was on Emma. The trauma of the incident had been severe, but witnessing the strength and unity of her parents gave her an enduring sense of safety. Therapy sessions helped her process her fear, and slowly, the shadow of Karen's cruelty lifted. She learned that courage isn't just about physical strength. It's about standing firm, trusting those who love you, and believing in the protection of family. My husband and I also reflected on our own growth. The ordeal had tested every aspect of our resilience, from patience to strategic thinking, from emotional control to decisive action. We realized that the combination of love, preparation, and skill could overcome even the most calculated cruelty. And in that realization, we found empowerment, not just for ourselves, but for anyone who might face similar challenges in the future. Community dynamics shifted as well. People were more vocal, more supportive, more willing to intervene when injustice appeared. The story of what happened with Emma became a cautionary tale, a lesson in vigilance, courage, and accountability. But more importantly, it became a story of hope, a story that demonstrated that even in the face of cruelty, unity and strategy can restore justice and safety. As we settled into a new normal, I looked at my family and felt an overwhelming sense of pride. Emma was healing, not just physically, but emotionally. My husband had returned from deployment to confront a threat that was entirely domestic, yet no less dangerous in its impact. And I had discovered a strength within myself that I didn't fully know existed. The strength of a parent who refuses to be powerless, who refuses to let fear dictate action. I also knew this story wasn't just ours. Across the country, countless families face situations like ours, bullies, manipulative figures, and threats that seem insurmountable. And what I learned through this ordeal is simple but powerful. Courage combined with preparation, strategy, and unwavering love can overcome even the most intimidating forces. So, to everyone watching this story, here's what I want you to take away. Protect what you love fiercely. Stand up against cruelty, no matter how small it seems at first. Trust in your strength, trust in your support systems, and remember that preparation and vigilance can turn fear into empowerment. And now I want to hear from you. Where are you watching this from? Comment your city below, because this story is meant to remind people everywhere that justice and courage are universal. Share this video with friends and family, so they know that even when life seems unfair, hope, strategy, and love can prevail. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. There are more real-life stories filled with suspense, courage, and shocking twists coming your way. Together, we can witness, learn, and grow from stories that remind us what it truly means to stand strong in the face of adversity. Because in the end, it's not about revenge, it's about protecting your family, restoring justice, and proving that cruelty can never triumph over love, courage, and determination. Emma is safe, Karen is exposed, and our family, stronger than ever, looks toward a future where fear no longer dictates our lives. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you feel the power of love, courage, and justice, don't just watch, take action. Comment below your city and let us know where you're watching from, because every community deserves to hear these stories. Share this video with your friends, family, and anyone who needs a reminder that even in the darkest moments, courage and preparation can overcome cruelty. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss real-life stories filled with suspense, emotional twists, and lessons in resilience. And most importantly, remember this: protecting your loved ones, standing up against injustice, and never underestimating the power of love and determination can change lives. Be brave, be vigilant, and be a force for good in your world. Because sometimes the smallest acts of courage can ignite the biggest victories.